scientists haven't come up with a way to really define consciousness or to explain it truly. We can explain all of our thought mechanisms, we can explain, why we do the things we do or how we think, but we can't explain why we experience this. And some people might say, well, it's just sensory mechanisms. It's just sensories. We feel, we see or we hear or we feel because of the sensories, right? Our five senses. But I mean, a camera lens has a sensory system too. It senses the light coming into the lens and translates those messages into information just like we do. But why doesn't a camera lens or a camera have consciousness? So consciousness can't be explained by just the sensory inputs or outputs. That can still happen automatically. You can still, your eyes, your ears, your mouth, you can still sense things in an automatic manner. You shouldn't be experiencing it. You shouldn't be aware of it. So where does this awareness come from? So my thought is that logically, if you're to look at a unit of consciousness, our brain, and you say, okay, what makes it conscious? And what's responsible for its consciousness? You can't say just the brain by itself, because that flesh alone doesn't create consciousness. If there's no electricity running through the brain, then you're dead. There's no experience there. So the experience happens with the electrons, the electricity, firing through the neural pathways or whatever. Or it's the reaction between the electrons and the flesh that it's going through, not necessarily just the electrons by themselves. But whatever particles are responsible for amounting to this experience of awareness, I feel like those particles have to have, individually, they have to have some very basic form of consciousness, like very, very basic, like just an experience. Like the electron by itself, it doesn't think, because the thinking happens through a thinking mechanism. The electron has to go through certain neural pathways, exchange information for the thinking to occur. So, an electron doesn't think, it doesn't, problem solve, it doesn't, judge or criticize, it doesn't have thoughts, it's just experiencing, is my theory. That it just experiences. It just has an awareness at a very basic level. And I think this because, again, if one particle doesn't have consciousness or anything like consciousness, or if it doesn't experience anything, and another particle doesn't, and then another one doesn't, and it doesn't matter how many you put together, you're never going to have an experience. So for consciousness to exist, I feel like whatever makes up that consciousness, each little particle that makes it up, has to have some element of experience, of experiencing from its own perspective. So that's why I feel like maybe electrons or photons, which photons are particles of light, and the electrons I believe absorb photons or release photons, because when a photon hits an electron, it gains an energy level, and when a photon exits an electron, the electron loses an energy level. So it seems like the electron absorbs or releases photons. So that photonic energy that goes into the electron, maybe it's not the electron that has that elementary form of consciousness. Maybe it's just a car that moves around and carries the photon around. Maybe the photon by itself has some state of consciousness or awareness, or it experiences. And again, I don't think that it thinks. I don't think it has emotions necessarily. I think it just experiences. And then you put many of them together in electrons, many electrons together in a brain, and they all work together in these neural pathways to form this more complex version of an experience that we call consciousness. Now, what do these particles experience? If they do experience, what do they experience? I mean, obviously we don't know, and if we did know, could we explain it? I mean, can you explain to a blind person what color looks like? Who knows what it experiences and how, and what it feels, but maybe it's a very, very, very basic form of consciousness. So this is a more complex form of consciousness because it's many conscious particles, moving around in all these complex pathways to form all these different reactions. Or maybe maybe it's the opposite. Maybe counterintuitively, photons, when electrons are confined to the limitations in our brain to go through, certain limited pathways, maybe that actually limits the electrons or the photons to what they can experience. So maybe when they're outside of our brain, when they're just free by themselves, maybe they're all-knowing because they experience everything. They experience all the energies of the universe that impact them. So maybe they're all aware of everything that's around them. Like God. Maybe electrons are God, or photons are God. And the religions say God is in me, He's in you, He's in everything around us. Well, electrons and photons are in me, in you, in everything around us, and they might be all-knowing. So maybe that explains what God is. And then God comes into us, into the flesh, right? And it's limited in the flesh. This is just like a far-fetched theory, but it's limited when it's in the flesh, to these certain limited circuits and pathways, and that's why we're in the flesh. We're far more ignorant. But again, ignorance is bliss, because maybe these photons or electrons are tired of being all-knowing. Maybe it's like, hey, look, we're in a human now. This is kind of fun, being stupid, doing dumb things, not knowing what's going to happen next. Maybe it's a good thing. Or maybe photons are the ultimate experience. Maybe when these electrons leave our brain, they're actually far happier when they're out there, because maybe just feeling the energies of the entire universe, it's like it feels all the energies of the stars and the galaxies, and maybe it's this like euphoric like high. It's like, oh, maybe it's like so much happier than us. Maybe that's why our experiences here as humans in the flesh are so much more limited. Again, these are just like random theories, but there are other religions. I think it's I don't know if it's Hinduism or which one it was, that think that consciousness is everywhere. Plants are conscious, all objects are conscious. And if this theory is correct, then that would explain that they were right, because everything does have electrons or photons in them, or most things. So maybe that would explain why consciousness is everywhere, and why these religions have a little truth to them. I don't have any biased attachment to religions. I'm just kind of fascinated by the maybe coincidental similarities between religion and some of these weird theories that are out there, or that I'm coming up with. It's just kind of interesting to think about all these things that connect. Like Einstein said, light is the constant of the universe, as he's talking about his theory. Jesus Christ, the religious leader, said, for in light there's truth. And there's all these symbolic things about light, and it's that'd be kind of cool if light itself, if the photons itself are, is the source of consciousness, if it's actually conscious itself, or just aware, not thinking about anything, again, not observing anything, not judging, not criticizing, not feeling emotions. It's just, it experiences. That's it. And what are we? We're just these blobs on Earth that are just moving around, automatically, just automatically moving and reacting blobs. But when the electrons and the photons or whatever are firing through this blob, the electrons get to experience this blob. It's oh, cool, look at this. I get to experience life through these limited eyes, or whatever. Or maybe again, maybe photons are actually a very, very basic form of consciousness, super basic. It's just I'm experiencing. That's it. I'm not thinking or anything. I'm just experience. No IQ whatsoever. Just experience. But then when a lot of those particles come into our brains, or they're used in our brains, in this complex circuit, then it creates a far more complex unit of experience or awareness, which is our consciousness and our thought. So could be many things, or I could be completely wrong about all of this, but they're just thoughts, because to me, again, it doesn't make sense for consciousness particles to come together to all of a sudden become aware, like what the hell? Like I'm just aware all of a sudden? No. How does that happen? It shouldn't happen unless particles have some element, some form of awareness. And then what would that imply? That, when we die, we actually are eternal. Our consciousness just separates into different, and goes off into different things. And who knows what we experience next as these, or maybe, our electrons are constantly circulating, recycling through our brain. New electrons are coming in, old ones are coming out. So, you could kind of say in a way that we're a different person like every instant, or being. So the flesh itself is dead, but the electrons and the photons are the life in that flesh, or the awareness, the experience.